Cool. I'm here with Dr. Destry Dokes. We're going to have a conversation.
Absolutely.
On being fully engaged.
Absolutely. I guess I need to be engaged, right?
Yes, you do.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Cool. You got me.
I should be as well.
Oh, yeah. That would help the situation, my friend.
Hey, thank you for being here today. I want you to share real briefly about your own personal education, your experience. But here's what I'll say. Hanging out with Dr. Dokes is such a cool experience because you have a joy and a passion for understanding human beings, how we think, how we act, why we do the things we do, in a world where we're all connected, in the marketplace where we're connected, in companies, families, churches, like all of these different things. And I think the thing that I see from you is a real passion and a desire to understand human beings. And so would you share with us we're going to have a discussion today, by the way, of what it means to be fully engaged.
Good.
And I know this is like the sweet spot for you.
Yeah. That's my area right there, my friend.
To talk about like us as humans being fully engaged in life, emotionally, mentally, being present, being there and giving our all to, in the life that we live. But I wanted to ask you, would you just share for everybody who's going to listen or watch, just a little bit about your experience and education?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So first of all, I'll just say that I came from the big old small town of Amite, Louisiana. And I got here as quickly as I could and married my darling wife, Janet Dokes. And we have two beautiful kids, Keith and Gianna. And a part of that process for me was my mom was a school teacher, so education was one of those things I had to do, right? I had no choice in that. While I loved playing basketball and football in high school, education was the core of my being, and my mom made sure that I understood that. And so I went on to Southern University where I finished. I started with McNeese, and then I finished with Southern University in accounting. Then after moving to Houston, I ended up getting my master's degree in business, and then I didn't have enough. I don't know what's going on with me, but I wanted more education, so then I went and got my doctorate from Walden University in a DBA, business administration, but in leadership. And my particular topic was virtuous leadership for increased business growth, really about engagement. Understanding how organizations were losing money and leaving money on the table simply because they did not have a connection or there was low engagement with their employees. And sometimes while organizations is trying to find ways to increase production and performance and save money, they're oftentimes not looking at the engagement part as a part of that portfolio of opportunities. So today I know we're going to be talking about that, so I'm excited to be here.
When you hear the phrase full engagement or a human being that is engaged, what does that mean for somebody who's well educated in the field, who's educated in the way that human beings think? You spend a lot of time coaching. You have your own firm. You coach people in executive leadership. You work with San Jacinto College. You've done a lot. You've worked for hospitals and with hospitals.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What does that mean?
Fully engaged simply means that when you show up for the party, so to speak, right, you are there not just for the music. You're not just there for the d'oeuvres or the soda, we'll put it that way, but you're there for all of it.
Yeah.
That you are fully present and engaged simply means that you've brought your whole self there. You didn't leave anybody at home, any personality at home. Everything and who you are is actually there, and you're operating in that space as such, opposed to being there and people saying, hey, what's going on with you? That means that your mind may be somewhere else. Your body is there, but your mind may be somewhere else. So fully engaged is really about being present in the moment and operating as such, and being involved with people are involved with as a group. If it's two people, then being involved with those two. If it's just two of you all or five of you, doesn't matter the number, but being fully engaged is about being involved with that activity that's taking place at the moment.
Is it an attention thing? I'm giving my full emotional or mental attention. I want to be present. I want to be hearing what is being said. I want to engage with other human beings around me.
Yeah.
Like, how would you gauge if somebody's fully engaged? How would you measure that, let's say with your family?
Sure. So with the family, it could simply be easy. Let's say I'm watching TV, right? I'm watching a football game, and this has happened, by the way. Mm-hmm. And so while I'm watching the football game, there may be a very good play that's taking place, but my wife or my son or my daughter may say, "Hey, Dad, such and such," or "Baby, such and such." If I don't answer them right away, that's a sign that I'm not engaged, and they may say, "Hey." They may raise their voice a little bit, not out of disrespect, but simply because they think I'm not hearing them. And so what they're simply saying by the raising of the voice is that I don't believe that you're fully engaged in the fact that I've called out to you. So what happens in our personal lives many times is that we show up and we're at functions, but we may not actually mentally be there. We are somewhere else. And that's why people have to ask us a question over and over, or make a statement to us over and over, because we are not getting it because we are not involved in that information. And the same thing holds true in business. We go to work, we have jobs, right? In the teacher space or the education space, they said years ago because of COVID, teachers were quiet quitting. I suggest that they were quiet quitting leaving, but there's a number of them who quietly quit, but they're still there working with you. And so basically that's what we're talking about when we're talking about disengagement, how people are still maybe in your present, but they are not a part of what you're actively doing.
Do you think, I know we're going to get into this in a second, about a world that seems to be disengaged. Many, many people around the world seem to be disengaged, especially in the workforce.
Absolutely.
But to your point, when we say disengaged, do we mean somebody who stays showing up because they need a paycheck, or because at some point they had a real passion for it, so they're trying to re-spark that?
Yeah, I would say you probably have a plethora of all of those different things. Let's talk about the workforce first around the world. So around the world, according to the Gallup study, along with other folks that they do research with, they stated that only 20% of people are engaged at work. Only 20%. That means 80% is not engaged. When you look at the United States in 2023, the numbers hovered around 32 or 33% was engaged. But the first part of 2024, it dropped down to 30%, which means 70% of the people were not engaged. I don't know about you, but 70% of your check was left on the table. You had an opportunity to earn that money. You had an opportunity to earn those relationships. You had an opportunity to earn and gain connectivity, but you did not. You left 70% on the table. That's what engagement is actually about. And the outcomes of engagement, disengagement, simply says, as I stated, that you left 70%. But what it says is that when you look at your bottom line, depending on if you're in a business, you're going to notice that your bottom line is not as healthy as you projected in the beginning of the year, because when you were configuring and strategizing, you did not talk a lot about human engagement. You talked about transactional things. Well, move that into your relationship. What if you had a relationship where everything was based on a transaction? I can tell you right now that at some point, you guys are going to disconnect at a level that it might go into a divorcing type of state of being. Not that you would ever leave each other, but it may happen inside of the family home to where you are not connected. When you come out, it looks connected, but when you go back, you're disconnected.
You're just roommates.
You're just roommates, right? So you're disengaged. So yes, to answer your question, people are at work, physically at work. They may have had a passion for what they were doing. And because in my study, I talk about how leaders have helped contribute to the disengagement by not being able to connect with employees because of our title, our salary. But at the end of the day, it's about people. And on my site where I talk about Dokes Partners, LLC, I say people first, then everything else will work for good. And what I'm simply saying by that is that if you connect with individuals as individuals first and as a group second, or a family or a village, whatever you want to call them, the results will automatically be what you're looking for or better. Simply because people feel that you care about them, then they care about what you care about. But if they recognize that you don't care about them, then they stop caring about what you care about. So if you want engagement, you can get access to that 70% that we're leaving on the table, whatever that happens to be. You can get access to that more connectivity, better outcomes, better results. But if you stay away from that connectivity, you're going to end up with disengagement. I'm going to tell you, my friend, it's more difficult to get people back engaged than it is to get them engaged in the beginning.
So you said something interesting right there that I want to pull at a little bit. You talked about caring.
Yeah.
So if we talk about engagement being, you take your wife on a date and you're there, you don't have your phone in front of you, you're dialed in, you're listening, eye contact, there's attention given. She interprets that as you care.
Yes.
Destry, Dr. Dokes cares.
Right.
I don't know if she calls you Dr. Dokes, but
that would be nice, wouldn't it? Actually, she does sometimes.
I assume it's
but I don't know if I'm in trouble when she does that.
Dr. Dokes, get in here.
Right.
But is that, I was going to just simply ask the question, why are so many people around the world, or let's just focus on our own country in America, why are so many people disengaged? Not only from the workplace, but from life in general.
Sure.
Do you think it's because people just don't feel cared for or connected, or what do you feel is the issue?
That's a very good question. So let me throw out a couple of things that you probably know, or the listeners probably know, or the viewers, and that is that mental health right now is on the rise, right? According to the data, mental health research, about 57.8 million people in America have some form of mental health issue. That's 1 out of 5, right, according to the data. When you have mental health issues, and then you have the workplace that you feel maybe engaged or disconnected from, either one, and then you have your life at home, right? So you have a life. Human beings have a life. And so all of these different aspects of their life, or nodes in their life, they play a part of how they show up any particular place. So for instance, if you have trouble at home, and then you have the freeways that if you've ever lived in Houston, if you got to go 59, 45, any of them, by the time you get to work, you feel some kind of way, even as a Christian, right? But the point to that is that when you leave home, you have some type of activities that are taking place. And then you have to go through this traffic of life to get to your job. By then, you feel some kind of way. And if you're going to a place where you don't have passion and you don't feel connectivity, you're going to feel even worse when you leave that place or while you're in that space. And you become more disengaged. And you don't feel like people in that space care for you. So you start to disconnect yourself and you just show up for a paycheck. And that happens to us. So you got the mental health issues. You got all of the circumstances here in Houston. We had to deal with Beryl that came through. And so life is happening with people every single day. And here's what I like to say. Most of us never really share the depth of what's going on with us. We only share a percentage. I like to say we share about 80%, but I would say that 20%.
I think you're being generous with 80%.
Most people say that, but I think the other 20% is that two things. We are trying to remain as an individual. We want to be that so that we can add value to the relationship. But I think the greater part of that is that we're trying to keep ourselves keep much of what we feel unknown. We don't want to become too vulnerable because as human beings, we think people will judge us at a level that we won't be able to recover from. And so we'll go living this life of feeling disengaged and disconnected and even sad. And what I ask a lot of my clients, I ask this question, are you depressed? And guess what they tell me? Functionally, yes. They are functionally depressed. And so what happens to us is life have all of these different things are taking points, all these touch points are taking place. And by the time we get to a work situation or a personal situation, or we leave them, we often feel some kind of way. And so I think that people are disengaged or feel disconnected because there's so many things that are happening in their lives that they feel like they cannot control. But I can tell you this, I suggest that if that's happening for you, the church is always there. Also, there's therapists, there's coach. You don't have to feel bad by going to a therapist or a coach. Come on. Mm-hmm. I mean, you need somebody that you can talk to work through these things. I remember asking
and be honest
and
with.
Be honest about and be authentic about who you are, or you can live that lie, or you can live that disengagement, and all it'll continue to do, PJ, is just eat at you every single day. And every relationship you have, people will be asking you every now and then, hey, what's going on with you? Well, that's because you haven't come face to face with that thing that's in the back of your head or in the back of your heart. You're keeping it back there. But folks, we can feel the energy that comes from you, whether you engage or disengage. So I would say that the disengagement is coming from a multitude of places, a plethora of places, because all the situations that we have in our lives. But it would help us if we had a place to psychologically safe space to be able to talk about that and to be able to get that to the surface so then we can deal with it. We can't deal with things that nobody know about but us. right? But it does show whether we know it or not. People feel your energy, and they can tell when there's something going on with you, whether you talk to them about or put it on the table. So I think it's coming from a multitude of places when it comes to disengagement, whether we're talking about the job and leaders, how they're connected or not, whether we're talking about our personal lives, how we are connected or not. I think it's just as human beings, I'm going to add something into the mix of this conversation, and that is Maslow's hierarchy of need, right? So human beings have this desire to have the things that they need, such as air and water and food, right? That's the psychological safety needs that they have. But then there's the self-esteem, and there's the love and belongingness. There's all of these different attributes that we need. We need to have purpose. If we don't have purpose, we tend to be sad because we feel like everybody else is being blessed and moving along and having all these things. Yeah. And PJ, I'm going to add this in. It's not about money. It's not about titles. It's not about big homes. It's not about the stages. It is about your purpose. What's driving you? What's causing you to get out of the bed every morning with energy and passion and go accomplish that thing that God has set before you? All of us have different gifts and talents. And if we don't have passion to go run after those gifts and talents and use them in the way that God has given them to us, something is derailed us. And we need to figure out what that is. And so I would say that at the core of who we are sits all of those challenges that we're dealing with that's throwing us off, but also our need to feel wanted and purpose and all this. And so when you put all of that together, right, what happens is sometimes people get confused. And so all of a sudden they show up in your space and they feel and look like they're disengaged.
The two words as you're talking, and that was great. It's so funny that you said psychological safety, because the first word that came to my mind when you said people don't feel like they can be honest about who they truly are or what they truly think, because they don't want to feel unsafe. They don't want to feel shunned,
right,
rejected, unsafe in a family, in an organization, in a team.
Yeah.
Do you think that's one of our greatest fears as humans, like just being rejected?
Yeah. Like, absolutely, yeah. It's like
you don't belong here.
Yeah, some people say that when they're given a stage, so to speak, let's say either on a real stage or just a stage, and as far as their titles or whatever, the most thing that they're afraid of happening is failing, right? But research is about failing every single day to get to a higher level of operations. So in research world, we fund research to get us to find that cure for whatever it is that we're looking for. Well, if they don't find it on Tuesday, they failed on Tuesday. But they failed running after their passion. They didn't fail just by happenstance. It was a strategy.
Yeah.
So oftentimes we don't like to show up with our authentic selves because we think people will see us a certain way and then we'll feel shunned, as you stated. And I think that's the fear that we have. So we never really tell people what we really want to say. We tell them what we think they want to hear.
The other word that comes to mind that you said is the idea of purpose, which is, I think, this is my personal opinion, I think human beings have a great need to feel significant. They add value. Not just that they are valuable, because I believe human beings, biblically, are intrinsically valuable, but they add value wherever they go.
Yes, and that's that whole conversation around belongingness. Right? Where you feel, wherever you go, if you feel like you belong there, you show up. You bring your full self. But if you go somewhere and you don't feel like you belong in that space, you hide your full self and you show up the way you think people want to see you. And that's all they'll ever get of you. So I think if we feel like we belong, and according to Maslow, that's one of them. Right? Love and belongingness. We want to be in spaces where we feel like we are valued. What we have is value. So if I'm singing a soprano and you're singing alto or tenor or bass or whatever the situation is, all of us, the big voice is greater than the individual voice. But if you don't value the soprano and all you value is the tenor, then you're going to get more tenor than you do soprano, where you have a problem. The big voice doesn't sound as in sync as it would if everybody was operating at the same level. So we have to value everyone's position on the team, so to speak, if you plan to win a Super Bowl in life. When you start to devalue someone, you're going to get disengagement because they don't feel they need to show up at the higher level because you haven't given them anything to enable them to show up at the higher level. Even if I am not at the level, so-called, of a Michael Jordan on the team, right? Whatever your team is, you can still work with me to get me to the best level that I can be.
Yes.
Right? Not to the best level of someone else, but what about the level that I can be so I can feel valued and feel like I'm a part of the thing and I feel like I belong. And so therefore, I'm going to bring my full self to the job. I bring my full self to the relationship, personal relationship. But when I call you or text you from a personal relationship perspective and you're not responding, then I'm going to think that you don't really want to talk to me, and therefore I'm going to start to detach from you and so forth. When you come around, you're going to think I'm disengaged. Well, you're absolutely right, because you're not responding to my needs, as Maslow said. So therefore I disengage from you, right? I shun away from you because I'm not connected with you. We may stay in the relationship, maybe, or we may not. But if I stay in the relationship, it doesn't mean that I'm functioning as an authentic person in the relationship. I'm just filling transactions, my friend, and then I'm moving on. But in my mind, I would prefer to be somewhere else. And so this is what happened many times with employees or in personal relationships. People have, because of life, if you don't give them what they think they need, or you don't value what they're giving you, they will disconnect from the greater picture that you have together. And if there's a relationship, personal or on the job, you're going to find that the outcomes is not what you expected, simply because you're not feeding them and validating them at the level that they think they deserve.
2008, Tara and I, my wife and I, got married in November 2008. In 2009, we went to a marriage conference. Less than a year being married. We went to a marriage conference in Dallas. And there was one thing I had done in my life. I'm going to tell myself. There's one, I'm not going to say what it is. But there's one thing I was so ashamed of in my life that I had never told a human being.
Wow.
Not one person. 27 years old. And it was probably 12 years old, this secret. Never told a person. And I remember sitting in the auditorium of the church of this marriage conference that we went to. And they lined a bunch of staff people from their church up at the front and said, if you need to come and pray about anything, if you need to share something that's on your heart, if you need to be honest and vulnerable about something, we have a bunch of people here who will pray with you. And I went, yes, I'm going to go tell this person who I've never talked to before about this situation. And I felt down in my gut, I felt God say, grab your wife's hand, take her to the parking lot, sit in the car, and tell her.
Wow.
And I went, no.
Wow.
No. And he was like, the Holy Spirit said, tell your wife. And I thought, I am cold sweat. So we did. At the lunch break. This is 11:30. I have 30 minutes. I'm ruminating. I'm like, this is going through my brain.
Yeah.
I was so ashamed. And he said, take her. So we did. We went and sat in the car, an 8-hour lunch that the conference gave us.
Wow.
And I looked at her in tears and said, I did this. And she looked at me and she said, okay.
Wow.
And then she said, yeah, I did this. And I went, and let me tell you, Dr. Dokes, in the first year of our marriage, the first year, that moment told me I felt safe.
That's amazing.
Telling my wife something.
Yes.
The first year we were married that I'd never told a soul. And I could genuinely then look her in the face and say, you know things about me no other human being on the planet knows. And there was immediate connection, and it felt like she was somebody that I could trust. And
instead of judging you, you gave her an opportunity to feel safe. So she shared something with you.
Yes.
So both of you were feeling something. Remember we said earlier that there's things that we don't share with one another. Both of you were feeling something, and you, by God speaking to your heart and allowing you to go to that parking lot and make yourself available and to share that, even though you had these feelings, you actually opened up the floodgate for the conversations to go back and forth about what was taking place behind our hearts, right, that we had never shared. That's beautiful. That's nice. I wish all of us could do that.
And I think, and obviously, in marriage, and I'm hoping, my prayer is anybody who's watching or listening to this, that if you're in a marriage, that you feel that safety. But at some level, even if it's not the most wild, the darkest corners of our soul that we've never, don't bear that to your boss necessarily. Right. But I think the point is I think that feeling, like you said, of psychological safety, of feeling like not only do I belong, but I feel like I can be honest and be my truest self.
Yes.
And then feel like I add something to the relationship because she could be honest with me and I felt like I'm adding value to her. It was just in that moment, I felt more engaged in our marriage than I had in our relationship that was going on two full years and almost a year in marriage. But I look back to that and I remember and I think she was so, like her reaction was so unconsequential.
Wow.
She just, on her face, she just went, okay, cool. Yeah.
What if organizations could do the same thing? What if as an employee, I could go to my boss, whoever, the listeners or the viewers, if you could go to your boss and say, hey, this is the thing that's stopping me from being at 100%, right? We're probably afraid to do that because then on your evaluation, you might have to look for another job, right? Or you won't get that raise. And so what we do is we just show up, disengage, and we hide behind those transactions that we do, and then we take our check home, but we don't feel passionate about that work. And so it would be nice is that if our organizations would create a space for us to be able to come in and really share, and it's relevant, right, to what we're talking about, but be able to come in and be able to share what you're feeling. Hey, today I'm feeling really bad about, XYZ because this happened. And what thoughts do you have? And if the boss was to sit down and say, hey, why don't you go home today? Why don't you take a day off? Well, I don't have any more days off. Yeah, but I want you to go home. We'll figure that out, right? Or you call in and say, I had a flat tire, and say, well, what time are you going to be here? Well, hold up now. Instead of saying, how are you? Are you in a safe place? Do we need to come get you? So what if we were able to do that in our professional and our personal relationships as you did? That was a great example for all of us to be able to create a space where it's psychological safe, not just for the teller, but the receiver as well. Like you said in your wife, not only did you get it out and she could say, okay, but she was able to in turn share with you because now this is a safe space. Now we can really talk. Right? Because before I was thinking you wanted to only hear this, you thinking I only want to hear this, and so therefore you only get these things. But what if we would just start to peel back the onion a little bit more? And when you start to peel back an onion, sometimes if you play with it long enough, you will cry. It will take you through some series. But that's okay.
That's
because
a great analogy.
If you take the onion back for enough and you put it in the skillet, it's going to release some sweet tasting things to it. Onions has the ability to flavor food very well, but you may cry through the process. It's okay. Yeah. Right? Because we're trying to get to a deeper sense of who we are in a relationship. And if we can do that on the jobs and we can do that in our personal relationships, I think we'll see a greater sense of engagement and a completeness and a fullness, and we'll start to be more authentic when we show up, and we won't be fearful when those stages of life are offered to us, because we won't think that you would judge us and shun us if we were to show up in an authentic manner and really share what we really have on our hearts.
It's interesting. I appreciate you said that. I found this on social media. I wanted to ask you this post.
Go for it.
It's a teacher.
Okay.
And she shares a story, an interaction with one of her students, her college students. She said, I had a student who was late to class one day, and they came up to me after class was over. And she said, they quote, "I'm sorry I was late. My mom died this morning, and I didn't know where to go, so I came here." And then she said, the teacher said in the post, "That was the day I decided to treat every single student as if I had no idea what they were going through."
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. I love that. I love that, because what the teacher did is step back and became empathetic, became a human being. Right? We all have situations. Instead of judging or looking at his situation as one of a default thinking simply means that we just fall back on what we know, what people have done to us, or our experiences. But instead, she saw that situation and that moment for what it was. She had empathy. she had grace. She was providing a level of grace for herself as well as the individual. I can only imagine what the teacher gained from that, as you said in the post. But this is where, if we could do that every single day in our lives, because every day brings about a different experience or a different thought process, and the enemy has a way of perplexing our minds and our thoughts. And that happens every single day. In fact, the Bible says that the spirit and the flesh war every single day. Is going through something. And so you can't live off of yesterday's war. You got to be ready for today's activities, because the enemy is not going to let up because you say you're a Christian or non-Christian. And so for us, we got to constantly look at every transaction or every activity as a fresh and new, because it requires new empathy. What we gave yesterday was one thing, but what we give today is another. It's different if a person is practicing that, right? Then that's a different situation. But if people are coming to us with being authentic about their situations and experiences, we should treat it as such. Not only do they become free and engaging, but we also free ourselves, not having to live on that old thought process. I'm going to embed something here that may seem a little paradoxical, but the fact of the matter is it's going to be exactly what we're talking about. I remember looking at a series from Herbie Hancock. He was playing with Miles Davis, the great Miles Davis. And Herbie said that they had been practicing these songs. So, boy, they was ready to go on stage and play these songs. But Herbie ended up playing the wrong series of notes during a particular song, and he said he felt really bad. But after the show was over, Miles Davis came up to him and said, "That was cool." And Herbie's like, looked at him and he said, "Cool." And he said, Miles Davis said, "You took me somewhere I had never been before." Instead of Miles Davis coming up and saying, "You're fired, you'll never play with me again," Miles said that the experience I had with you when you did something different caused me to do something different. So Miles was basically saying, I don't want to hear what we practice. I want to be taken somewhere. I want you to see the situation when we're on stage differently than what we practice. So instead of going back to your default setting, the teacher could have went to a default setting and said, "I'm sorry, you're late." We look at the rules and the regulation. It says XYZ. That's the default setting. But what the teacher did was empathetic and looked at the situation as fresh, with fresh eyes and brand new, and with empathy, and said, "I am so sorry." And it caused that teacher to sort of see things differently moving forward for everybody else. And so instead of going to our default setting, we should always be looking to capacity build. Find a way to be better than we were yesterday. Find a way to leave it better than you found it, right? And when we are able to do that, we ourselves begin to grow and become more engaged in our journey.
So it makes me think about this post, and what you just said made me think of the phrase self-imposed ignorance.
That's good.
Like, as a human or as a leader or as a husband or a father or a friend, like you and I, we're friends. Like, we work together, we do leadership stuff together.
Absolutely.
But this is based on friendship. Like, I would hang out and talk to you even if we weren't doing leadership stuff together.
I think we can do that. Yeah. We'd have to check in with our wives, but I think we can get away with that.
We'd watch football and cut up.
Absolutely.
But I feel like it's one of those things that tell me what you think about this. The more I self-impose ignorance, what does that mean? The more I choose to act like I don't have any idea what somebody is going through, the better I can be at really giving them attention or being engaged with them on a level that they feel valued.
Yes.
Because I go, "Hey, what's going on with you?
Yeah.
What's going on with your life?" Hey, I know Simon Sinek and some other leadership people talk about this. It's the idea of, instead of saying, "Hey, this is the third quarter in a row that your numbers are down, get them up or you're gone," to, "Hey, this is the third quarter in a row your numbers are down. Are you okay? What's going on with you?" That simple change in life, much less leadership, is huge. And I think it's very empowering, if you want to use that word. It's empowering for another human being to go, oh, you want to know if I'm okay? Well, honestly, Dr. Dokes, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
I'm not okay.
And it's okay to not be okay.
Right.
Right. To have it. So I call that checking in. The first thing I do with employees or with people that's in my space, the first thing I do with a text message or whatever it is check in. And that simply looks like this: "How are you doing?" "Well, I don't have the report." "No, I didn't ask you about the report. I said, how are you doing? I want to know how you feel and what's going on with you. I don't want to be transactional in this conversation. I know we need to get to the report if it's a work thing, but I want to check in first with you. So when we can check in with others, in today's society, everything is about competition. So we try to make ourselves look big, and sometimes at the expense of others. So we don't want other people to know that we are having challenges, but we'll exploit their challenges. That's the society that we live in. I say, instead of being that way, let's check in with one another. And when we check in with each other, when I feel like you care for me, again, I am going to be more engaged in our conversations and in the relationship. The relationship itself will begin to grow because I understand that you're not trying to get one up on me. Right? You're really just trying to learn who I am instead of saying, why are you asking me how I feel? What is that about? No. Why are you asking me how I feel? Man, that feels good to know that somebody cares about me, that somebody is thinking about me. What if, and you've done this many times, say, take out your phone. You told classes this many times. Take out your phone and send a text to somebody and tell them thank you or I love you. Right? That's amazing. Now, the other person on the other end of the phone might be saying, what? Right? But the fact of the matter is, the individual that's sending it is starting to realize that, wait a minute, why did PJ have to tell me to do this? Why don't I do this as a part of who we are in our relationships? Well, we don't do it enough, right? We don't check in with each other enough just for the sake of checking in. I don't need anything. I just need to know how you're doing. But I'm going to call you back. You don't necessarily need to. I just was checking in to see how you're doing and make sure you're okay. I'm praying for you, right? So when you can start checking in with people as in personal relationships or on the job, when the last time as bosses that we have actually gone out and checked in with an employee down the hall and actually spent some time with them to see how they're actually doing opposed to going to look for a report? When we can do things like that, we're going to change the dynamic of our organization. Instead of we're going to go from good to great. Right? Or greater, because people are starting to feel that we care about who they are in the household. When you come home, opposed to saying what we're eating, right? And I'm guilty of that sometimes. My wife will say, yeah, baby, I'm getting ready to cook, right? But the first thing I should be doing is saying, how are you? How are the kids? Is everybody okay? Is everything, everything's good? Once you get beyond everything being good, then we can talk about those other transactional things. But oftentimes we defer to transactions like Herbie Hancock on the piano because he had practiced a particular chord. He wanted to do that transaction at that moment, but Miles Davis needed him to play something different, so it'd take him somewhere else. The student was looking probably for the teacher to say, I'm sorry, this is what happens at this school, here are the rules. And the teacher was probably not looking for the student to bring that, but both of them learned at that moment because they both was empathetic. The teacher first, and then thereafter the student gets it, and then they pretend to perpetuate that type of thinking or mindset through all of their relationships. So what if we can check in with people first opposed to asking them from something?
Along with the question of why are so many people disengaged, I want to get to and you've already shared, like, how can we, moving forward, like, what's the solution for society as a whole? Yeah. With so many people struggling. But before we get there, like, who's at fault?
I don't think.
Like, is it the person who's disengaged for not feeling like they can speak up? Is it the person that they feel like they can't speak up to on the job?
Sure.
Is it that so many people just want to show up and make a paycheck?
I think that we are pushing the default button. So I think we both are to blame for whatever we feel in that moment. And what I mean by that is that the default button says that as the leader, you have to do these things and I have to do these things. We never really explore, can we do it differently? I always say when I speak, whether I'm in the States or not, when I speak, I always say that when you ask a question of why we do things the way we do them and the answer comes back because that's the way we've always done them, I say that must be in the Bible. That must be a sin in the Bible somewhere, right? Because that's not an answer. Right. Just because we have done it that way doesn't mean we have to continue to do it that way, looking for new results. Keep doing it the same way, but we're looking for new results. So most of us, we press the default button in our relationships. We just go to the default thing. If you say something to me, I'm going to say something back to you. If you give it to me, I'm going to give it to you, right? And so that's a default button. What if we're having a conversation and somebody gets a little loud in the conversation, what if we can dial back some and say, I'm listening? right? Instead of giving it back, what if we can actually listen to what other folks are saying to us? Now we begin to usher in what we call real engagement. So I don't think it's anyone's fault. I think we're just perpetuating the default button. We keep pushing it because it's all what we know, right? But we can change that by being a learning organization or having a capacity building mindset to where we're looking to go beyond where we currently are. When you're thinking that way, you're going to be like the teacher. You're going to accept the child from an empathetic perspective when they come to you with the fact that they have lost in their life, and then you yourself will begin to change. So I don't want to put it on the person that's disengaged or the leader or the other person. I say that it's a collaboration. Everything is a collaboration. We're social creatures, and most of the time we want to push a default button because it's easier to do that. But I say, forget the default button, create a new button, a button called capacity building, new thinking, innovative thinking, or whatever it happens to be, even though it may include old ways of doing things with new ways of doing things. So I say to open ourselves up to something that's new, and it's okay to think outside of so-called box. There's a theory called the fleet theory. And in this theory, I don't think I learned this maybe at Southern University or Magnesia, I'm not sure anymore, but they said fleas can jump 3 feet. They took the flea and put it in a 2-foot box, took the box off, and the flea would only jump 2 feet, even though it had the capacity to jump another foot. They then took the box off, put a 1-foot box on the flea, took that box off, and the flea would only jump 1 foot. But if you were to talk to the flea would tell you that they only have the capacity to jump 1 foot. That's a default that the flea was prescribing to, but the fact of the matter is it could jump another 2 feet naturally without having to practice to go to 3.5 or 4. So many times with us, we get to the point that people have told us about ourselves and who we are and what we're going to be and not be until we believe that. And so we live up to it or down to it. But I say, instead of listening to that, listen to what God says about you. And our Pastor Joel and Victoria, talk about this every single week. And that is that you don't have to live inside of those lies. You can live beyond that by trusting what God has said about you, what he thinks about you. And that is, he loves you and he knows that he has a good plan for you. And so if we can start programming that into the situation, we'll go beyond those default buttons and we'll go to this thing I call capacity building.
Do you think, 2 things come to mind as you were talking about the engagement, like who's at fault, who's not at fault? Is it a collaboration, a societal collaboration? Let's say for a corporation who has a supervisor that their people are not fully engaged. Mm-hmm. If there's awareness, do you think that there's a lack of engagement because somebody doesn't want to risk, because it's risky as a human being to try to connect with other human beings?
Yes.
Because we don't want to be rejected. We don't want to feel like this person doesn't like me.
Yeah. But
or do you think it's one of those things that people go, well, there's an inconvenience there. I don't want to spend the time.
Yeah.
I pay you. That's the leverage. Do your job. Yeah. I give you a paycheck. Yeah. Do your job. Yeah. Like, how much of that do you think is, and we may not have a number, but
sure,
how much of that percentage is, I don't connect with people because I don't feel safe myself. I don't know how to do it. It's a risk.
Yeah.
It's a risk. Yeah. To build relationship. It's a risk to check in with people.
Absolutely it is. And so I like to throw in a couple of things before I answer the actual question. And I'm going to go to disengagement when I answer the question. But before that, you got to understand something. We need to understand that in our spaces are introverts, extroverts, omniverts, ambiverts, and all others kind of verts. And what that simply means, you may have people in your space where being openly engaging and outwardly facing may be very difficult for them. You don't know their upbringing and all the different things of what's happened to them. So that could be very difficult. A person could have been abused. And so psychologically they've been damaged and they don't want to be around people or be touched, right? It's not that you're trying to do anything to harm them. They just don't want to be in that space. But then you could have the extroverted person. So you can have all of these different personalities trying to function in one space from a market perspective under one mission and one vision. But they come from all of these different places, educational levels, cultures. They're bringing all of this to the same marketplace and trying to deliver one thing that you want them to do. Well, that's difficult because you got people involved. And people, when we go through experiences, we show up with such. If we get a scar today, then tomorrow when you see us, we'll probably still have it on our arm, right? So wherever develop that scar, and then throughout the day, we'll recognize that scar, right? Well, we do that in our daily function. So if somebody has scarred us along the way, we recognize it. And if we see something remotely close to it, we back off from it. So we don't want to take the risk of getting involved in something that may hurt us again or leave another scar on us. But that's oftentimes what leads to us being disengaged, is that because of who we are as individuals, naturally speaking, introverts or extroverts or whatever we may have, because of our culture background, one culture, you may not be able to look a person in the eye, just all sorts of things. You may not be able to work directly with men or women, depending on the situation. And so we have all of these people in one space trying to move one initiative forward. That's difficult for any leader to be able to do that. But one thing true about those individuals is that they are people. And they still want to feel belong, like you value them, that there's a need for them, their skill sets, who they are, their voice. I like to say that when you allow every voice to emerge, until you do that, there's no decision that can be made, so to speak. Obviously, that's relevant to the situation, but you want everybody to have a voice and feel like they have a voice. And when that happens, you cause the situation to arise to where disengagement sort of dissipates and engagement sort of increase. Engagement takes a lot longer to get to the levels that you want them, but disengagement will go down super, super fast if you don't connect with people.
So what are some things we can do? Let's say in the leadership space, if you have a team, an organization, a church, a business, what are some things that we can do? Let me tell this story before I ask that question, because I want to shift the conversation there. But I want to share a story. When I was a youth pastor for high school, I had a young man who was 16 years old come into service one night. And I remember walking up to him right toward the beginning of service, putting my arm around him and saying, "Hey man, did you have a good day?" And he looked at me with just this joy on his face, and he said, "I got picked for student council at my high school."
Wow.
And I looked at him and I said, "Man, I am so proud of you. Way to go. Really proud of you." And I walked away. In 2 minutes I came back and he's got tears flowing down his face. And I said, "You good? You okay?" And he said, "My father left when I was 8. He's like, "That's the first time in my life somebody's ever said that."
Wow.
When I accomplished something big.
Amazing.
And I realized in that moment that not only understanding his life and his situation, understanding what's going on in his home, but to say, "Man, thank you. Really proud of you. You're adding value to your high school. You're engaging your fellow students because you've run some sort of campaign to be on student council." That's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
And the response that I got from him, somebody told me years ago when I first started in youth ministry, I was 23 years old. And I said, "How do I do this?" I never thought I'd be a youth pastor. I never thought I was cool enough. I genuinely didn't. I'm like, I'm not cool enough for youth kids. I'm not up with trends. I don't do any of that sort of stuff. And I had somebody tell me, they said, "It doesn't matter. They don't care if you act like them. They don't care if you dress like them, talk like them, listen to their music. They do not care. All they care about is if you care about them."
Yes.
And get in their world.
Yes.
And so I'd gone on some mission trips, and he said, "Have you ever gone on a mission trip?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "When you engage a people group you've never been around, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I try to study up on some of their traditions, their culture, like their norms. I try to do some research. And then when I get there, I ask questions." And he said, "Exactly." He said, "Do this. When you work with teenagers, treat them like any other people group you would go to anywhere else in the world. Learn their culture, learn their language, get in their world and listen to them. Get in their world and understand them." Because Maslow's hierarchy, people want to be loved and understood.
Yeah.
And that hit me so hard in my mid-20s, and I went, ask them questions. What's going on in their world? So anyways, I say that to say, for me, that was a moment where I went, this 16-year-old kid just needed one person to say, hey man, I'm really proud of you, and listen to something he had done, something in his life that he hadn't shared with a whole lot of people. Anyways, the next couple of weeks, I mean, he walked in and he was so engaged like he hadn't been before in service and with other students. And anyways, so I guess my question is along those lines, what are some things that we can do from your personal and professional experience? And the thing about it is this, and I know you well enough to know, even if this wasn't your professional career, even if you hadn't studied and done all of that, like the passion in your heart to engage with human beings on how they think and how they engage and how we socialize, I know is really something you would do regardless.
Yes.
So I guess my question is, in all of your, not only personal experience, but in your learning, what would you say are some practical things that we can do?
Yeah, the first thing is basically what you did with the 16-year-old. You said, I see you. I see you. Not only do I see you, I'll celebrate with you. That's awesome, right? We want, as you stated about Maslow's, we just want to feel that somebody see us, that somebody recognize us and can celebrate with us. That's the first thing. So as leaders, when these small accomplishments are made inside of the marketplace, if you just let them know that you see them in an open meeting, right? You can either announce their name and what they've done and just a round of applause. They may think it's something, nobody's ever done this before. Yeah, that's why we're doing it, because nobody's ever done it before. We're going to celebrate every small accomplishment we make is a part of the big picture. So we need to celebrate that as we move through. The other thing let me ask this. Do we underrate recognition? Yes, we do.
Do we downplay it?
We downplay it. Sometimes we do it with a cake. Sometimes we do it with a card, but the leader may not be in the room. But he paid for the cake and the card, or she paid for the cake and the card. Well, that's not celebrating, because as the employee looks around and don't see you, they realize that you may not even care. Even if you're super busy, do it when you're not busy, because they need to see you there to celebrate. Sometimes they don't even want the cake. Most of the times we feel like in the marketplace that if we pay people more, they would be more engaged. That's not, the research says that's not true. It's not about more payment. Yes, can they use a couple more dollars? Absolutely. But that's not the reason that they're tremendously disengaged. The reason is there's no connectivity. You're not creating an environment that makes them want to connect to who you are and what you're doing. So I think some practical ways is, number one, show people that you see them. Number two, celebrate them after you see them. Number three, show them some type of appreciation for during the celebration moments. In other words, offering their name up at a big meeting, mention them 2 or 3 times at different meetings, try to show others that if they do these type of things, they will be mentioned as well. And then people will start to say, this is interesting, right? The former leader didn't do stuff like this. And now they'll start to get on board because they know that they'll be recognized, or be what I call, they'll be seen. And we want to be seen, and we want to feel valued and like we belong in the organization. And when you don't recognize us for what we believe is important, then we will stop functioning at that level and become disengaged.
My first job as a pastor was a youth pastor. And I took over a youth ministry that had about 30 students in it. And I asked a buddy of mine who had been in youth ministry for a decade, and I said, how do we need to train our volunteers to engage, our volunteer leaders to engage with students? And he said, the big L. And I said, what's the big L? And he said, you need to train every one of your small group leaders to listen. They come from homes and schools and teams where they don't get to speak a lot. Many of them. Some of them do.
Yep.
But like you said, the engagement is, I see you, I hear you, right? It used to be much more than it is now. It was children are meant to be seen and not heard.
Right.
And I grew up with some grandfathers that were very much like, boy, you take my advice. It is gospel. But I remember our first training that we ever did with some volunteer leaders. We had about 25 of them. And I told them, I said, what's your number one responsibility in these small groups? It was Teach? Nope. It was encourage? Yep, that's great. Do that. I said, number one thing, your job is to listen. So we would, every single time we would meet after that in a training once a month, I would say, what is your number one job? What is our number one intent? And they would say, to listen. I would say, yeah. We went from 30 to 105. This is a church of 1,000 people. We went from 30 to 105 students in 4.5 months.
That's cool.
Kids started showing up from everywhere. This is a small town, small little town in East Texas. And I said, guys, they want to hear the gospel. They want to hear the word, which is important. But this is so much more. I could tell students were engaged because they got to come and they got to express. They felt safe. They felt like they had a place where they could be known. They could open up. And it wasn't anything I said. I stole this advice from a buddy of mine. And I was like, guys, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a brand new 23-year-old pastor. I don't know what I'm doing. But I knew one thing. I listened to that person and we tried it. And it was like, listen, so when you say, hey, I see you, you are known, and we want you to know us. The times where I've had people in my life, whether in personal relationship, friendships, family, or in leadership and supervision, those are the times where I felt like, man, I want to give my 100%. I want to be all in.
Yeah.
I want to be engaged.
Yeah. And listening is a lost art, right? And it's one of those things that if you're talking to someone and you're trying to get a word in while they're speaking, I'm not sure you're listening to them, right? And so there's an acronym that says, it's called WAIT. Why am I talking? So when people are talking, we should be actively listening. Now, I can tell you that when you actively listen, most folks are not familiar with that, so they'll think that you're trying to be funny with them. So in America, we have this sense of way we communicate is not necessarily true active listening. It's not that you're not listening, but active listening, there are some things that you must do to show people that you're active listening. But most of us are not used to it, so it does come across as a little funny, a little weird. And so we got to make sure that depending on where we are from and culture-wise, that we are demonstrating it in such a way that it can be accepted as such, because you don't want it to go the opposite direction and not feel like you're listening to them. But so when people feel seen and heard, is that because you are showing them that they're heard. For instance, if I tell you something or put something in a report and you go on stage, so to speak, and take it and run with it like it's yours, then I'll say, that was my idea. They took my idea. Or if I go on stage and say, hey, is Pastor Jeremy in the audience? And you stand up and raise your hand. I'm getting ready to let you know that this new idea that I have that we're going to do for whatever, he actually came up with it. Can we give him a round of applause? And you're going to go, whoa, that's good. And guess what you're going to do? You're going to go back and create more ideas. Not only you, but everybody around you is going to recognize that maybe I can create an idea. Now the engagement level starts to bubble up and becomes more enriched, like those 30 to 105 students that came to the class. So it's about making people feel like they are a part of what's going on, that you see them, that you hear them, that you're listening to them. Not only are you listening to them and you see them and hear them, but you're going to recognize and celebrate them for the good works that they're doing. Who doesn't want to be celebrated, right? If you put the ball in the hole or kick it through the goal or whatever in the net, you want to be celebrated for doing that. And that's important to a society where we think competition is about high level celebration. So we all want to feel a level of celebration. And so if you can show a person that you see them, you hear them, and then ultimately as far as being able to move to high engagement, it's a process. Nothing is as simple. We're talking about being seen and heard, but what does that look like functionally when you go into the marketplace or to a family? I'll tell you this, that I'm working on a workbook now that is going to be around emotional intelligence and relational intelligence. And this will be a thing that you're going to use to work through your challenges. And I'm going to be bringing that to the surface probably in December, January. But it's something that I believe that will help us to work through the situation, not just talk about it, but at the end of the day, we have to be accountable for our journey. Someone may have done you wrong. The person may not have saw you at work, but ultimately you have to show up and be accountable for who you are. And how do you do that? That's a process. And so this workbook is going to be something that is a process that we can work through to help people show up and be more engaged in their lives.
Do you think the skill of engagement can be learned?
Yes, because engagement is really about connectivity, and usually that happens with people communicating, effectively communicating with one another, not just communicating with words, but all forms of communication, the countenance communication, the expression communication, the non-expression communication, this every form of communication that you can think of. When you use all of those forms of communication, people can get into the space of engagement at a deeper sense of the level. Sometimes engagement is disengagement. They're engaged. So in disengagement, there's a percentage of it that's actively disengaged. And what that means is that people are engaged in trying to get you disengaged. So they're actively disengaged. And so under that 70% that we talked about, there's a piece of it that's actively disengaged, which means people are trying to win you over to their side by saying, I don't know why you do this. I don't know why I wouldn't be doing that. So they're trying to win you over to another space. And so you got to be very careful of that. So you still have to do your part, regardless of what the leader is doing or not doing, regardless of what the spouse is doing and not doing. What are you doing? You have to do your part, and we have to do our part. And so if we want to see engagement, we need to demonstrate engagement, right? If we want to be seen, we need to show people we see them. If we want to be heard, we need to show people that we are listening to them. And all of these methodologies or all these processes is a way that we can show up more engaged and more fulfilled in our journey.
You know, I coached high school basketball in my 20s, and I used to tell my players all the time, if you want to add value to the team on the floor, I don't need you to shoot threes and dunk the basketball. I don't need you to score 28 points a game. Defense and rebounding is about effort.
Yeah, takes more.
It's just effort. Like great defense in basketball, when I've trained students in the past, when I've trained young men and young women in the past in basketball, I tell them all the time, you can have very little to zero natural talent to play defense. It's all effort. Now, you learn some skills, you learn how to, techniques and footwork, and you learn some things, hand movements and all of that. But as opposed to offense, where you got to learn to dribble, you got to learn to pass.
Yeah.
You have to, natural talent in a shooter has to be there.
Yeah.
Most kids that I've seen that are great shooters have just a natural talent. They're born with hand-eye coordination that most other people aren't born with. But to play defense. And so it's one of those things for me. I look at engagement in life and in leadership as just an effort thing. I don't think you have to have a PhD in a field of study.
No, you don't.
To learn to engage with people. I just think it takes effort.
And it takes a level of passion, right? You have to want to be somewhere, and you have to want to be involved.
Yeah.
At least you got something to work with. If you want to be there and you want to be involved, you got something to work with. But if you're there and you don't want to be there, it's going to be very difficult to get you involved because mentally you don't want to be there. So I think you have to bring something to the table, right? You got to meet me halfway if you want to make this thing work. And that's in any relationship that we're in. So it's not all on the boss. It's not all on the spouse and all on the friend. We are 50% of that circumstance. And so we want to make sure our 50% we're upholding a very great deal. And we want to ease into their 50% by helping them to show up at a higher level like the teacher did, like the student helped the teacher show up at a higher level when it comes to demonstrating empathy. So we got to make sure that we are doing our part. And that's the same thing true in the sports world, that even though you teach them the skills to be a good, decent defensive player or offensive player, they have to go out on the court and do it. You can't go out there and do it for them. They have to do that.
Yeah. You know, I read a study not too long ago that said there's something psychologically in human beings that if we spend eight minutes in a single day, 8 minutes with somebody, our 8-minute engagement with them can turn their entire day around.
I believe that.
It can change their attitude. It can change their countenance. It can change their engagement. So thinking about something like that, people go, man, I don't have time for hour-long once a month coffees or lunches. Or I'm like, I don't think you need that long. I think a text message.
Yeah.
A single 3-minute phone call.
Yep.
You know, I had a buddy of mine who read the study with me, and he texted me a couple weeks ago, And he said, hey, you got 8 minutes. And I immediately knew what it meant. I immediately knew what he meant, because I was like, he was struggling. He battled some mental health stuff, and he was struggling that day. And he immediately was like, hey, and I can only imagine the vulnerability and risk it took to text me to go, do you have 8 minutes? And I was like, yes, I do.
Wow.
So I called him and we talked. It was about 15 minutes, but we talked, and I realized when he texted me that, I realized what he was going through. I knew him well enough to go, I get it. No judgment. Call me. What are you going through? Yep. Let's talk through it.
You know, so to that point, as you said earlier, I have a professional development and leadership coaching company, Dokes Partners LLC. But I remember this happened just last week. So I had a client, I was in a meeting, and I had a client to reach out to me, phone call, and then I hit the phone and said, I'll call you back. Then it rung again. And I said, I'll call you back. And they said, I need to talk now. I immediately stepped out of the meeting and got on the phone and realized at that point, when somebody is reaching out to us, and sometimes it's not a phone call, sometimes it's acting out. Sometimes it's the subtle things that's happening. People are reaching out to us in multiple ways, but sometimes they have to really get our attention through a phone call or a text message and say, no, I need to speak to you now. This is important to me. And when you take time away from whatever you were doing to give to them, they will value that beyond your imagination, because it feels like you care about me. You saw me at that moment when it was critical, and at least in my mind, in my heart, you took enough time, you took at least 8 minutes, right, to be able to talk to me about whatever it was or whatever it is going on. And to me, that feels important. And that's what we should be doing for one another as human beings. We should be able to take out those 8 minutes and give to you. Yes, are we busy? We're all busy. Right? But if we don't take a moment to lean into and connect with our employees or connect with our relationships, no wonder we are disengaged, because either you pay now or pay later, but you're going to pay. So it's a lot cheaper if we pay now by taking 8 minutes out, opposed to later when we got to deal with some outcomes that we don't want to deal with. So I like the whole idea, again, seeing individuals, being intentionality, taking moments to where you can check in. That's intentional. That's something that you can do to increase engagement. And the person might say, this seems weird. Why you? Because I want to check in. I want to do this now on. I'm going to check in with you. Is that okay? Yeah, that's pretty cool. And I guarantee you they're going to tell somebody else. But what's going to happen most that you know is powerful is that they're going to expect you to check in. If you don't check in, they're going to remind you, hey, what happened to you yesterday? That tells you that they're looking for you to check in on them. And now they have a place in their world to where they can have this conversation and connection. So I think that's very powerful to be able to do that.
One of my favorite things, and this is going to sound weird, but one of my favorite things is when somebody makes an effort to ask me what's going on in life or how I'm doing, and I know they're not doing it from an emotional place of, I just have a longing to hear Jeremy talk. They're doing it because they want to be intentional. You know, it's one of those things in life that sometimes you go, man, I want them to feel it. Mm-hmm. You know, my wife, I want you to feel like taking the trash out. Well, I don't. It's not an emotional thing that I'm looking forward to.
I'm excited to take the trash out.
Look at me, I'm taking the trash out. Look how happy I am. You know, like Santa Claus over the shoulder. There are things I do, and I feel like caring for people, like, do you care? That's the question. I think we've talked about that throughout this conversation, is, do people care? And to me, if you do it when you don't feel all of the emotions of like, I want to be a good person today, when you do it just because you're like, man, this would benefit that person.
Yeah.
I don't always feel it. I know it'll make my wife happy if I take the trash out, and I don't feel it. I know it'll make her happy if I do the dishes, and I don't feel it. Or I cut the grass, or I take care of the dogs. I don't feel it. And I'll be honest with you. I'm like, I do not want to do this, but I will do it because I love you. I care about you, right? My wife, not Dr. Dokes.
Yeah, I got you.
Profess my undying love. No, but I feel like it's one of those things that in that moment, as a human being, and I may be weird, I don't know, maybe somebody listening or watching this feels the same way, but I almost look at it as this person cares, because they don't feel it and they do it anyway. They don't feel like, you know what, I don't know that I have 10 minutes today, but I'm going to do it on my way home anyway. I'm going to make that phone call. Intentionality.
Right.
Like, I'm going to sacrifice some of my own wants. I'm going to sacrifice some time on an evening where somebody takes 5 minutes and calls me. Anyways.
And that feels great when you are the receiver of that phone call or that text message.
Right.
And it also feels great if you're the giver, the person who took time out after you finish that call or that text message, you realize, whoa, first of all, it didn't take that long to do. And secondly, it made the person feel really great. Why don't I do this more often?
Yeah.
And if you were the receiver, secondly, to be able to get that, you then would feel something, and then you would perpetuate that as the teacher learned to do with the students. Now I'm going to see students differently. I'm going to show empathy in these situations. And so if we can approach it that way, I think we'll find a greater sense of satisfaction when it comes to filling our buckets, of our emotional buckets.
I feel like if I'm in an organization where a supervisor has a really busy schedule, and they tell me, hey, I called you today to have a chat because I had open space in my schedule, versus them calling and going, you know what, today was one of the busiest days I've had in years, but I wanted you to understand this was more important than all these Zoom calls that I'm doing. That to me is, and I'm not always expecting that, but that to me is like, well, you got an open spot in your schedule. Cool. I appreciate that. But to me, it makes somebody feel like a priority when they go, no, I'm the busiest I've been in months, but this is important.
So we want to feel special. Remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We want to feel needed.
Yeah.
We want to feel like we are valued. And we want to, again, feel special. How do we do that? Well, sometimes you just stop what you're doing. And you know what? At the end of the day, it's not going to hurt, right? That thing that you're talking about, it'll be there. Somebody is going to get that thing done. So it doesn't hurt us to take a moment to pull back from our agenda and go check in with somebody else's agenda and just check on them to see how they're doing. We will feel good about it. They will feel good about it. Now we're creating an engaging environment. They'll begin to expect us to check on them. They would even start to check on us because of what you open. And then it make the leader feel bigger than life to be able to do things like that. It's the small things that we do that make a difference. You don't have to make a big showing all the time. People are not necessarily asking you for that, a big salary raise and a big showing. What they are asking you for is those moments to where you were very intentional and where they were authentic moments. Even if you stop me in the hallway and say, hey, I heard you talking about your dog. You lost your dog the other day. How you feeling? You know how far that will go from a leader, right? And so our Pastor Joel, he does it all the time by showing up after the service and just making himself available to shake folks' hand and listen to their stories, right? You can only imagine the stories that they've told. But these people have waited to see him and to shake his hand, and it's important to them to no end that they have a chance to be in his face, and they'll remember that the rest of their lives, and they're going to go tell everybody that they know, who's then going to say, well, let me go shake his hand and be a part of what he's doing. There lies the engagement, because it was authentic. He was very intentional. I would be on the second floor, close to the library, come by, shake my hand. I look forward to seeing you. We should be doing that as leaders on our job. Hey, I'm going to be in the office on Tuesday. I'm going to walk down the hall to see how you guys are doing. So if you're there, open your doors. I'm going to stop by and just say hi to you or knock on your door. I look forward to seeing you. People go, whoa, that's like awesome. That's what we should be doing.
Yeah.
That's the intentionality, showing people that you see them, that you value them, and that you are intentionally going to provide time for them to be involved in who you are as an organization, especially in the marketplace. Same thing holds true in our families. Let our kids know that, hey, I haven't talked to you in 2 days. What's going on with you? Right? Let's talk.
Yeah.
Right? That's important to our children more than we will ever know.
I feel like, and I'm going to give you the last thought.
Okay.
But to me, the disengagement, this is my opinion, I feel like the disengagement comes when somebody feels not like a human who belongs, but like a hired skill for the position.
Yes, because that's technical, right? That's transactional. And who wants to be who wants to be a number, right? Who wants to be a button?
Right.
No, people have names. They come from places. They have experiences and circumstances every single day. People want you to recognize and see them for who they are as a human trying to be, opposed to a transaction or a number in a book or a title in a book on the budget page.
Trying to do.
So, I would say that, PJ, that all of this around engagement, we talked about emotional intelligence a little bit. We talked about Maslow's hierarchy of need. All we are is just human beings trying to have a life. And every now and then it'd be nice if you ask me how I'm doing, right? I boil that down to that. I'm a human being. I'm trying to do life. Life is trying to do me.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to have my space. But I would love to be valued in this space. I'm dealing with enough stuff on the left and the right that could drive anybody crazy or make anybody disengaged. So it's nice to know that you thought about me for 8 minutes, enough to text me or call me and check in on me. So I think that if we want to see engagement in our worlds, whether it's the marketplace, in our personal space or social spaces, provide it. Show people what you would like to see.
Yeah, you take the initiative.
You take the initiative, right? Well, he hasn't called me or she hasn't called me. Well, have you called them? Well, no, they need to call. Well, it'll continue like that. So why don't you reach out? There's no guarantees, but you can sort of set the pace of what it should look like, right? Jesus was the best example of that for us, right? By going to the cross for us and dying for us on the cross. So how many times do we die for others in the sense of we check in with them at their worst times as they go through life and doing life? So I think that if we wanted to see engagement happen, we ourselves have to demonstrate what engagement looks like.
I'm reminded of a scene in a movie called Patch Adams where Robin Williams is a medical student and they're doing their residency, and he's sitting there with a bunch of other medical students in lab coats, and there's a woman laying on a bed. She'd been brought in. She needed medical care, surgery of some kind, and they walked up and very sort of coldly said, "This is case number 101834. And this is the disease and blah, blah, blah." And they asked all these really technical medical questions and then the instructor said, "All right, does anybody have any other questions?" And Robin Williams peeks his head around the rest of their group and he said, "Yeah, what's her name?"
Yeah. Isn't that beautiful?
And there's not a more brilliant, to what you just said, there's not a more brilliant scene that I've seen in a movie than that, to go, "Yeah, what's her name?" And I think, and everybody made fun of his character in the movie because he cared about those things, but he ended up having the highest scores in the entire medical class in the movie. And the whole point to it was you can be a really, really skilled technician and be human at the same time.
You can do both, right? You just have to be intentional about it.
Yeah.
Right? You can go get your doctorate or not. You can go get your master's or not. You can go get your bachelor's or not, or certificate or not. But it's just nice to be nice. My grandfather used to say, it's just nice to be nice. So why not say good morning? Those simple things that doesn't cost us much. 1 second, good morning. We're done. But the power of that good morning goes beyond your wildest imagination, because you don't know from whence that person came and what they got to go back to. So the fact that you say good morning, have a great evening, you just empowered them to come back into your space and engage at a different level. And eventually they will start talking to you or opening up to you because you are demonstrating what engagement actually looks like.
I love it. Dr. Dokes, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yep.